welcome in to Texans Today. I'm your host, Jeremy Chuggs, and the entire practice squad is filled out for the time being for the Houston Texans. So I'm going to go ahead and rank from 17, yes, I said 17, all the way down to 1, every single member of the Texans practice squad. And I'm going to rank it on their likelihood of, playing actual meaningful games for this Texans team and how good I think they are. And if they'll be able to, at one point during the season, possibly get called up and make an impact for this Houston Texans team. Before we get into those rankings, though, like today's video if you want the Texans to blow out the Colts. Don't jinx it. Don't jinx it. I've been told, by the powers that be in, the NFL script writers room that if this video gets 500 likes, the Texans are going to blow out the Colts. Now, I can't say for a fact that's going to happen, but you don't want to be that one guy who, on game day is like, damn, I wish I would have liked that video and the Texans would be absolutely smashing the Colts right now. Go down and hit that thumbs up icon if you want the Texans to win their week 1 matchup. Now, let's get to this Texans practice squad. Going from 17, 16, 15. We're going to go one by one once we get to the top 10. But these are the back end of the roster, or practice squad roster guys that were signed earlier today. The one that I want to highlight, QB3 maybe? Kedon Slovis, the former USC Fighting Trojan, now in the NFL. No NFL regular season action for Slovis, but a decent college quarterback and going to be a guy on the Texans practice squad. I don't think he's the QB3. If anything does happen, everybody knock on wood. Everybody knock on wood. If anything does happen to our quarterbacks, I think they'll end up going out and signing another guy, but Slovis is a decent practice squad option. Now, let's go from 14 down to 11. And I know you're wondering, hey, Jeremy, I thought the Texans were only allowed to have 16 guys on their practice squad. Well, that is true, but the Texans have an international pathway program player in Kilian Zierer, the offensive tackle from Auburn. No NFL action for Kilian, but because he is an international pathway program player, the Texans are allowed to keep an extra guy on their practice squad, i.e. why they have 17. Another guy from that list that you just saw maybe stands out a little bit. Xavier Johnson, former Ohio State Buckeye, former, one of Stroud's boys. He's a Stroud boy for the Houston Texans, but he's going to be reuniting with CJ down at Houston on the practice squad. Running back, wide receiver hybrid is Xavier Johnson. So I think he could, be an interesting fit in this Texans practice squad moving forward. Now let's get into the top 10. First up, J.J. Taylor, somebody who I think really flashed during the preseason. I really liked what I saw out of J.J. Taylor. He looked really good in my opinion. With this Texans running back room, with how full it was, I get why he didn't make the team because, it's tough making the initial 53-man roster for this Texans squad. But J.J. Taylor brings you something with special teams as well. He's a pretty decent back in the backfield. I think he fits well into this practice squad. I could have honestly put him a little higher because if anything does happen to the running back room, I wouldn't mind pulling J.J. up into the, 53-man roster for any games this season. I think he played that well, but for right now, I have him at 10 because I do think a couple guys could possibly get some action sooner than J.J. Taylor. I want to know from you, though. I thought J.J. Taylor looked really good in the preseason. Didn't end up making the 53-man roster. Who's somebody that you thought played really well that didn't end up making the team? I know I'll get probably a ton of Noah Browns on this question right here. Maybe, Ben Skoranek, some other guys that you thought maybe played pretty well but didn't end up making the 53-man roster. Let me know your guy who played well in the preseason that didn't make the team down in the comments section. Now, another one of those guys who was signed today, Mark Perry, safety from TCU. The Texans, I've talked about their secondary and how they possibly could add somebody in that room, maybe a veteran down the line, but Mark Perry, obviously part of that TCU squad that made the college football playoff, could be a decent option for the Texans if need be. I don't think he ends up getting pulled up. If anything happens, I think they go out and sign somebody. But Mark Perry, a decent guy to have on your practice squad. Solomon Byrd, somebody the Texans actually drafted this year out of USC. Didn't end up making the squad. They went with the veteran option in Jerry Hughes instead of Byrd, who they drafted in the 7th round. But another guy who I think, he could possibly be one of those guys like a Xavier Hutchinson who was on and off the practice squad last year, played a little bit for the Texans towards the end of last year. But I think Solomon Byrd is a guy who, you see it in college, a redshirt year for Solomon Byrd, where he's not going to make an impact this season for the Texans, but he's probably going to be carried out throughout this practice squad this year unless he gets signed by another team. And then possibly next year, next offseason, comes back with the team, goes through training camp, preseason, and hopefully gets better and can make this 53-man roster. Coming up, I'm ranking the rest of this practice squad. Some very notable names that you need to keep an eye out for, but I couldn't do today's show if it wasn't for our amazing sponsors over at Factor. Factor Meals is what I use because I'm a busy man, and if you're a busy person as well who wants to eat healthy, I have the perfect thing for you. I've recently been trying to get on track with my health, and today's sponsor, Factor Meals, has been a huge help. Meet your wellness goals in time for football season thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. Keep kitchen time to a minimum. Factor meals are ready, like I said, in just 2 minutes. So no shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleaning up involved with this. Head to factormeals.com/TexansChat50 and use code TexansChat50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code TexansChat50 at factormeals.com/TexansChat50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Get started with Factor Meals today. Next up on the practice squad, David Sharp, the offensive tackle they brought in free agency, has been, up and down in his career, but another good option to have, at least on the wings on your practice squad if anything does happen to this offensive line. Obviously, you drafted Blake Fisher in the second round to be that swing tackle, to be that, break glass in case of emergency type of guy. But David Sharp and another player you'll see coming up soon are some good options as well. If anything does happen to Jeremy Tunsil or Titus Howard during the year, I could definitely see the Texans bringing up one of these two guys. Next up, Johnny Johnson III, maybe the best name on this practice squad. He actually looked pretty decent in the preseason in training camp for this Texans team out of Oregon. I think Johnson is a decent option to have, waiting in the wings as well at that wide receiver position, a stacked wide receiver position for this Houston Texans team. But, same thing. If anything happens, if any injuries occur, I could see the Texans possibly pulling up Johnny Johnson III. Now, the other tackle I was, foreshadowing earlier, Cameron Erving, who they signed in free agency this offseason. I think, once again, he could be a good option, a veteran option if the Texans need it. This is what they're keeping right now on their 53-man roster with, obviously, your starters, Jeremy Tunsil, Kenyon Green, Juice Scruggs, Shaq Mason, Titus Howard. Blake Fisher, like I said, is going to be that swing tackle. He can play right tackle, can play left tackle if you need. And Nick Broker also is a guy who can play guard and tackle. But I do like Cameron Erving being on the practice squad, a guy who's had a lot of NFL reps, and I would trust being, on this 53-man roster as a backup, as a guy who can come in and help out when needed. I think this is a good stash by the Houston Texans, getting Cameron Erving on their practice squad. Another guy who played decently in the preseason, had a little bit of up and down at times, D'Angelo Ross. Last year, played in short stints for the team, 8 tackles in 2023, but D'Angelo Ross could be a guy who I'm not really positive if he's better or worse than the guys that the Texans kept on their 53-man roster, to be honest. They have, Miles Bryant, they have Chris Boyd, they have Jeff Okudah as the backup options at cornerback. Are they really that much better than D'Angelo Ross? I'm not sure, to be honest, because I do think they're all in that same tier level of not good enough to be a starter. None of those guys are good enough to be starting for this Texans team. It's obviously Kamari Lassiter, and it's obviously Derek Stingley Jr. D'Angelo Ross could be pulled up if one of those guys doesn't perform or if something happens in the cornerback room. I could easily see that happen. And if there are any injuries with this team, if there's anything that goes down, any free agency moves, trades, you don't want to miss out, and this is the place to be. Make sure you subscribe for the best Texans coverage on YouTube here on Texans Today. We passed 16,000 subscribers. Now we're headed to 17,000 subscribers. And I just got to say, Thank you to all of my viewers, all of my watchers out there. You are the ones that make this channel so great. We have the best Texans community here on YouTube, thanks to you folks at home. So thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you so much for watching the vids. It really means a lot for me for y'all to click in these videos, hit that like button, comment down there, and let me know your thoughts, because at the end of the day, we're all Texans fans wanting to see this team do great things, and I'm just so excited that I get more than 16,000 people to root along this team with me each and every week. Now, let's get into the top three here. Marcus Harris, somebody who I was a little shocked didn't make the final 53-man roster. They drafted him in the 7th round out of Auburn, and I actually thought he looked really, really good in the preseason. I thought he was one of the standouts in each of those preseason games that the Texans had. I really liked his ability to get into the backfield, really shed blockers at the line of scrimmage. I was surprised that they went ahead and kept Tim Settle Jr. They put Kurt Heinisch on short-term IR, so he'll be back in week 5. But with, the defensive tackle room a little bit up in the air with DeMeco Autry suspension, I did think Marcus Harris was going to find his way onto this roster, but he makes it back to the Texans practice squad, which I'm very hopeful that at some point he will get a chance to show his stuff and make his way to this 53-man roster and maybe get to have some game action this year, because I think he can develop into a really good defensive tackle in this league. Next up, and this is another guy who I was like, wow, I thought he might have done enough to make the roster as well. Malik Fisher, the former UFL product. He went to college at Villanova, but another guy looked really good in the preseason. I thought a really good edge rusher, was one of the best defenders in the UFL last season. Makes it back to the Texans on their practice squad. Another guy like Marcus Harris, where I could easily see him getting some snaps this season and making his way onto the 53-man roster for certain games, for certain time periods. But I really like Malik Fisher. I'm hoping that he stays with the Texans throughout this year. And kind of like I said earlier with the redshirt year, I really hope Malik Fisher gets a chance to develop. He's still only 25, so he's really young. I think that he's a really good edge rusher and can develop even more with guys like Danielle Hunter, Will Anderson Jr. kind of helping these other guys along the way. Even maybe like Jerry Hughes, another veteran on this team. But I like what the Texans have in Malik Fisher on this practice squad. But he's not my number one guy. My number one guy, and I've been singing his praises all offseason, is linebacker Max Tooley. I really thought that he was going to make the final 53-man roster. I really did. I thought with these Texans linebackers that they had, that Tooley did enough, that he looked really good in the preseason. He was one of the priorities that the Texans made. As soon as waiver claims were done, they were like, we got to get Max Tooley back on this practice squad, and they did just that. They went ahead and went with, maybe some more experience in guys like Delshon Phillips, Neville Hewitt, Jake Hansen instead of Max Tooley, which is understandable. But another guy, which I hope that he gets a chance at some point and can really show his stuff throughout the season. I really like Tooley's game. He is a hard-nosed player. He gives it his all every single down, and I love his tenacity on the field. I really hope we get to see the mullet in action at some point this season. That was my number one guy who the Texans put on their practice squad. Who do you think is the best player on the Texans practice squad right now? Let me know down in the comment section. This is gonna be how I know you made it to the very end of the video. So let me know who's the best player on the practice squad right now. If you want to continue the conversation, if you want to hit me up on social media, I'm at Jeremy Chuggs on X and on Twitter, on TikTok as well, at Jeremy Chuggs. Give me a follow. And like I said, we're trying to get to 17,000 subscribers before week 1. Can we do it? I need your help. Go down and hit that sub button for daily Texans videos all year long.